Hi all. In the previous session we have discussed about the different dimensions of big data where we have spoke about the 6 V's. In today's session we will talk about analytical process model. So this is one important model which tells about the entire analytics process. So if you see in the picture, the complete analytic process is divided into 3 parts. That is, the first is the pre-processing part, then comes analytics, and finally the post-processing. So in the pre-processing, the first one is identifying a business problem. That is, whenever we are going to do an analytics, first we have to analyze for what particular business problem we are going to do this analysis. So unless and until we know what we are going to do with this data or what should be the final output of this data, we won't be able to proceed further. So the first and the major step is to identify a proper business problem. So once you have identified this business problem, the next step is identifying the data sources as well as selecting the data. So this data sources can be multiple. From different sources we'll be getting the data. We'll see what are the different data sources in the coming sessions. But to speak about here, the data sources can be many, and it is always better to have more amount of data. That is, more the amount of data we'll be able to get a good data, or we will be able to extract a good data from it. So it is always better to have more amount of data or data sources. So once we have identified the particular data sources, then we have to select a particular data which we are going to analyze. So for this we will be having different OLAP operations which will be doing, like roll up, drill down, slicing, dicing, and all those things we'll be doing. So once we have done with the selecting of the data, the next step is cleaning this data. We have to clean and transform this data. So that is the next step. So for this, we will be using different models for doing this. That is, the data should be made clean. That is, whatever unnecessary things are there, that should be removed. And once that data has been cleaned, the next step is to transform this data to the useful data or to different forms in which it is required. So once that is done, the next step is analyzing the data. So when we analyze the data, we make use of different patterns. So this patterns, there are different types of patterns. There may be some rules which we use, or there may be some clusters we use. There may be some relation among these things. So all these things will be applying it here when we analyze the data. And there may be some patterns which become trivial for this particular process. So why we are using pattern is just to validate it. So there is a general example which tells that there is an association rule which tells that if you buy bread, then there are high chances that we'll buy jam or butter. So that is something called as an association rule. That is, when we purchase one particular item, there are high chances that we'll purchase one more item which is related to it. So that is why I told, if a person is buying bread, then there are high chances that that person may buy jam or may buy butter. And also the key issue which comes here is to find an unknown but most interesting and actionable patterns. So when we find an interesting and actionable pattern which are unknown, that gives new insight to this data, and with this data which we are going to acquire from this particular analysis, we'll be having new profit opportunities also. So this is something called as a knowledge diamond. That is, to find an unknown but yet interesting and actionable patterns. So once we are done with analyzing the data, the last step is we'll interpret it, evaluate it, and deploy this particular model. So this will be done with the help of different experts. There may be people who look into it. There may be systems also which actually does this interpretation evaluation part, and we deploy it. And all these things, whatever the process, whatever we have discussed here, it acts like a cycle, or it may go back and start from the previous steps. So it goes and goes back to the previous steps, and it may iterate it again. Why? Because we may get more amount of new data, and for that we have to do additional cleaning which is required, additional transformation is required. So all those things are done again and again, or it may be done multiple times. So the more and more the steps are iterative, we will be able to get a proper analytical process model. and usually the time taken for this entire process will be almost 80% of what is required to build an analytical model. So this is a major step where we start from the business problem, identify the data, select the data, clean the data, transform the data, analyze it, and once it is analyzed, we interpret, evaluate, and deploy this particular model. The next topic is analytical model requirements. So whenever we develop a particular model, that model should satisfy several requirements depending on the application area. So in that, the first requirement is the business relevance. So it means that this particular model which we are going to develop should actually solve the business problem for which it was developed. It's not like we develop a system now and after that it is not being used because its output is not proper, or maybe it is not taking the proper input, or the operation is not happening for what it was meant for. So that should not happen. So the particular model should be relevant to this particular business and should be able to give a proper output which was required, or it should work accordingly for what it was developed for. The second requirement is the statistical performance. There are multiple statistical operations, for example like classifications or clustering. So all these operations what are to be meant for, it should be done very well. Also this particular model should have a proper predictive power. It should be able to predict the future, or it should be able to predict the output from all the input what it has been gained. The next requirement is interpretable. So this output whatever we are going to get, or the patterns which we are going to generate from this analytical process model should be understanding, and it should be able to be understood by the particular business user who is going to use this. Also the output should be justifiable. So it means that whatever output we are going to get, that should not contradict with the basic values or basic things what are being told in that relevant particular field on which it is being developed for. The next requirement is it should be operationally efficient. It means that when we are going to do a particular operation like collecting the data, pre-processing it, evaluating the model, feeding its output to some other business application, so all this process should go efficiently and it should work very well. The next requirement is the economic cost. The cost should be economic. So this, when we talk about this cost, it should be about the cost for the humans who have worked on that, for the people who have worked on that, the computing resources which are used during this particular process. So all those things should be considered, and after that a cost benefit analysis should be done and the cost should be efficient. So that is what this particular step says. And the last one is to comply with the regulations and legislations. So the model which you are going to develop, it should comply with both the local as well as international regulations and other legislation. So it is very much important. So these are the analytical model requirements. The first one was business relevance, that is it should be relevant to the business which it was developed for. The other one was statistical performance, where the statistical operations performance should be done well. Should the model should have a proper predictive power. The output should be interpretable by the business users and also should be justifiable, that it should not contradict with the basic theorems or the basic values what are there in that particular field. It should be efficient operationally. Also the cost should be economic, and also it should comply with the regulations and legislations. In the next session, we will discuss about types of data sources, sampling, and types of data elements.